Coin traders, what's going on? Thank you for joining me for the show. Looking at Bitcoin today, and it's looking, although we are seeing a little bit more price action to the upside, we are looking at a little bit more of a bearish pattern forming, and we're going to talk about that in the show today. Now, today is the 12th, and tomorrow on the 13th, we do have the start of the Fed meeting, which does have the announcements coming on the 14th for inflation and things like that. And then also tomorrow, we are still expecting Sam Bankman-Fried to be appearing in Congress, which is what he agreed to anyway. So whether or not that happens, we shall see. But a couple big events that we are going to be monitoring for the next couple of days. So right now, Bitcoin looking at 17,169.91. So a very nice rally and upside right now after having a pretty big flush and a little bit more bearish activity last night. So essentially what we were having is a little bit more, and let's actually go ahead and draw these lines out. So we had more or less a falling trend line that did shape up to be a little bit more of a pennant type pattern. So last night actually had a pretty substantial bearish break below that, found support on top of a higher low, and then now finding a rally again to test this upper trend line. So if we actually change the pattern a little bit, we still have the rising level of support coming in. But one thing you can actually notice, and let's go ahead and flip over to the daily to talk about this, is that we're actually starting to form a little bit more of an ascending triangle. So if we talk about an apex for that, still looking at about midway through December in about a week or so. And right now, price point for that would be about 17,500. So still below our $18,000 target. But if you notice too, we can draw a price level right at the top, which almost is where the apex is found. And obviously this isn't an exact science, but right there with that big point of support before the huge FTX flush, and then also that resistance point for the daily close on that bounce attempt. So still haven't been able to find enough momentum, but after finding several stair-stepping patterns of higher lows and for closing support, that has been a little bit more of a good sign as well. But still, we are going to be eyeing this pattern, especially in the wake of some announcements and things like that, depending on how they go. So I would expect, based on however that results, we could see a bearish run-up, or we could also see a huge bearish flush. I think potentially we could get a lot of that already priced in. So now I do want to actually switch over right now into the 2-day, because if you look up overhead, we're still in a resistance point for these EMAs for this 2-day. And in addition to that, have a huge big line of closing resistance, which does come in right now at 17,229. But what's actually significant right now about this chart is that we actually have a big zone of basically closing support and closing resistance previously. So a lot of support. And so if we actually look, previously we found a lot of closing resistance right around the 16,680 level. And then currently we are finding support that we have been finding over the last about a week or so since having this big, nice bullish candle coming in right at 17,085. So this effectively is going to form a gigantic zone that we're going to hopefully be able to find a lot of support in, because it has been big resistance. We blew through it and had this huge, nice bullish candle. And if we pull up volume as well, you can see it's not necessarily that big. And overall, we still are getting a little bit more of a tapering off for overall bull volume. So not necessarily the best signs there, but overall, we still have this very nice level and zone for closing support. So a lot of lower downside shadows combined with a lot of upside wicks, showing that this is definitely a very strong zone. So zone is going to be from about 16,680 until about 17,085. So definitely a big point and a big nice level that we could ultimately see prices get stuck up at, and hopefully they would be holding, because the lowest level we would like to see is 16,680 for that. Now, while we are on the 2-day, do want to look at some technical indicators. So let's go ahead and look at the MACD, moving average convergence and divergence next. So nice increasing bars over the zero line for the histogram, which does mean a little bit more positive momentum. And also we are in a bullish formation, MACD on top of the signal line. And like we like to see with the MACD, we actually are getting distance between the MACD and the signal line. So that is actually a good sign for MACD, even though this is a little bit more of a laggy indicator, but still a very good sign. And yeah, so looking at RSI now, we actually didn't find an oversold level for this 2-day RSI. But if we do zoom out and look left, we are extremely oversold, and actually did find a lower low compared to when we did get extremely oversold back then. So lower lows in price, higher lows in RSI is a little bit more of that bullish convergence. And we are actually now seeing a little bit more upside, but whether or not we can hold and actually see that, or whether or not we actually reject right around 18K or just below it is going to be what we do keep our eye on. Now, so if we do talk about that resistance point where the EMAs are right now, that also aligns with looking left, big point of support on this initial bounce before we ran up and flushed to our lower lows. So again, another big resistance point. So that whole zone coming in from 17,815 all the way up until about 18,200 is going to be extremely resistive. So even if we do get a little bit more upside, because we are experiencing a little bit more of that bullishness based on the indicators, but like we said, we haven't really found enough of that coming in on the overall volume. So actually, if you can look, we are actually seeing a little bit more volume during this period from the end of September until about the start of November when we did get our FTX flush. So now a little bit of a huge pullback and decrease on this 2-day chart. So if we can actually start to see a lot more of that volume coming in, then that'll be the sign that we actually need to see in order to assume that we're going to get a little bit more of that favoritism to the upside. Otherwise, if it does stay stagnant in about the levels that we are seeing, then we would expect actually a little bit more of a retracement. So hopefully we can rely on some news-driven catalysts to create some of that bullish momentum. But unfortunately, right now, being in a bearish setup in a bearish market, news-driven catalysts are only pretty much good for a short-term bounce unless it's just constant in order to change the sentiment. Not really expecting that, and yeah, even if we do get a little bit of a bounce, still looking at topping out around the low $18,000 level before seeing another of a pullback. Now, I want to actually flip over and talk about the Fear and Greed Index because we actually haven't talked about this for a while. So right now we are on the 3-month time frame, or the actually now we're on the 3-month, and you can see the highest we got was 40. So looking at the 1 month, we've been pretty much stagnant between the 20 line and the 30 line here. So not necessarily any sort of momentum powering to the upside. It's pretty much just been constant in this fear level. So not really enough to create a lot more upside and a lot of buying. And that's why a lot of people are still sitting on the sidelines right now. And now I want to actually take a look at the search interest for Bitcoin because we're actually kind of on a linear downtrend. So if we do look at the overall trend for search interest, we're actually tapering off, and you can see this just linear downtrend ever since last May back in 2021. But we have gotten our spikes and stuff, but you can see that also we're actually coming to basically a little bit more of a resistance point. So now since we are back under this 25 line, just like we saw the whole time in 2019 and even 2020, it is going to get stuck up there. So not necessarily a bad thing since search interest isn't completely reflective of price and it doesn't behave the same as a price chart, but still nonetheless, it is still trends that we typically do look out for. So we are going to need to find out where this is going to bottom out and ultimately find that search interest support, because that is kind of an indication of the overall status in the rest of the crypto community and kind of a gauge for overall impact and sentiment. So flipping over to the 6-hour, chart right now, just forming lower highs on this overall pattern. So whether or not we actually top out, we would need to see a high on top of 17,271.92, which is where we topped out before actually flushing and then holding our higher low. So still going into a little bit more of a consolidation and pennant pattern. If that does ultimately end up playing out, then based on a target to the upside from the current pennant shape, ultimately we could assume, that we would be looking at a target effectively that would have us coming in about right up to that 18,400 level. So that's pretty much a max point I would think that we would be getting up to. Now, if we look at a Fibonacci retracement from the high before the FTX flush, then you can see that would put us right around the 50% retracement line, which is actually a pretty good level to hit. Now, below that is the 38.2 coming in at 17,787. So if we do get stuck up at that, that's pretty much going to be a confirmation that we will be setting a longer term lower high and likely experiencing a pullback to test some of these lower lows, because this will shape up to be more of that ascending triangle or a little bit more of that bear flag and a bull trap type pattern. And that's usually a good indication of that. And then typically we do look for a little bit more downside pressure from there. So short term, that is what we are going to be looking for, and longer terms, we're still pretty fearful right now, but overall, these patterns are starting to look a little bit better, and especially on this daily chart, we are starting to see candles that are pretty nice looking, because we do have very nice bullish candle, long period of just small bodies, which all completely fit in one bullish candle, and then the same sort of thing. We had one nice bullish move to the upside, and all these candles both before it and now after it, are still fitting inside of these bullish candles. So ideally what we're going to see now, especially with a pretty bullish looking candle with a long lower shadow, which is longer than the size of the body right now, we are about 2.5 hours from the daily close. So we will see how this ultimately ends up closing. But if we can see a very nice close for this daily candle and then a very nice follow through bar for tomorrow, that'll be a very good sign. And then we will be expecting some more of those upside targets breaking the 17,800 to 18,000 to even 18,150 levels. So those are going to be our upside targets. Whatever we see happen there would need to ultimately pull back, set a higher low in order to continue this little mini uptrend. Otherwise, if we do get resisted from those levels, we would be pulling back and still needing to set a higher low compared to the low right now at 16,875, which is where we did just recently bounce off on the current daily candle. So with that, that is going to go ahead and wrap up the show right now on this little update for Bitcoin BTC on that ticker. Hope everyone is doing great, staying safe, making a lot of those dollar cost average buys if that is your strategy, which I do recommend for most people. But of course, that's not financial advice, just my own opinion. And yeah, thanks once again for watching. Drop me a note in the comments sections below. And if you did enjoy the video, please hit the thumbs up, like, and subscribe button if you haven't done so just yet. Thanks again for tuning in. Stay safe, take care, and I'll catch you back in the next video.